Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today. Today I'll be joined by Bill Ho, who is principal analyst at 556 Ventures. Hey Bill, how you doing?
Well, thanks.
Great. And also we'll be joined by Jeff Silva, who will be with us in voice only. Jeff, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Sure, glad to be here.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Well, the topic today is we're going to talk a little bit about the spectrum, I guess, spectrum issues going on in the country, kind of about spectrum in general. We did a webinar last week on this topic that you can check out on the RCR Wireless site, where we use some PowerPoints and a little more in depth there on the topic. So please feel free to check that one out. We also came out with a report here at RCR last week as well on the topic, so you can download that from the rcrwireless.com site. But the point today is to kind of, I guess, kind of follow up on some of the discussions we've had on the topic of spectrum, a little more interactive here with us able to kind of more interact with each other. So I guess one thing I want to start off with, maybe with Bill, is, and this is something I know we talked about a bit on the webinar, but I guess get your general overview of kind of where we are spectrum-wise in the country. I know we kind of talked a bit about where the carriers are in their spectrum holdings. So maybe I guess get from you your view on kind of where carriers are in terms of their current spectrum positions.
The two big guys probably are in the best position from a holistic spectrum portfolio standpoint, simply because they dominate in the low band, and due to that capability, they can offer geographic coverage. So if you look at coverage maps for Verizon and AT&T, they have vastly larger coverage, and it's basically because of the low band. They also have good holdings in the other bands as well, PCS, AWS, and sort of others. And to Sprint and T-Mobile's credit, they also have low band, and they're I guess they're clawing back with some low band and putting that stuff in service. Recently, the the A band for 700 for T-Mobile. Once that's done, and then with Sprint, they've got to get that rebanding all said and done, and also they're implementing 800 on their former IDEN spectrum. So I guess it is in a nutshell that low band really rules the day for the big two, but the other stuff that the other competitors have are working well, but it can also be better.
Yeah, and it does seem like that's kind of the big key right now. Is there's a lot of discussion around low band spectrum. I know obviously there's an incentive auction coming up here middle of next year, which will invite some more of that low band spectrum to the market. But that still seems to be kind of what we're looking at. Is there is perhaps that benefit of having low band spectrum? I know carriers are trying to get some more of it. And that seems to be a bit of a challenge. I know maybe from Jeff, I guess get your point of view on. I know with the national broadband plan, the government's looking to get a lot more spectrum out there. I think at one point they wanted to get 500 megahertz of new spectrum out there, and obviously that's a lot of spectrum. Has to come from a lot of different places. I guess how's the government doing? I guess in getting spectrum out there. Your views, kind of on the Washington Insider view of how that's happening, and I guess is there any sort of pressure on the government to get, to meet that target, and maybe even more specifically to get maybe more low band spectrum, because that does seem to be perhaps that prime real estate for carriers to really be able to compete and offer good services.
Sure, Dan. Yeah, the FCC, actually the entire government, because NTIA works on this as well and has input from industry. I think that right now it's going to come in fits and starts, and it's going to require a combination of different approaches. They've got the traditional auctions. They had the HBlock. They're getting ready to get some rules together on the AWS3 auction at the March 31st meeting, and they're working on incentive auction rules. But they're also looking on greater sharing.
Mm-hmm.
They also have to determine what the split is between licensed and unlicensed spectrum.
Yeah.
And they have to do all of that within the context of competition policy, and that's where it gets a little tricky, because one of the big policy issues that's being debated right now is to whether the spectrum screen should be revised in a way that would give greater weight to spectrum in the low band, that is below 1 gigahertz, greater than spectrum above 1 gigahertz. And of course, Verizon and AT&T control the lion's share of spectrum below 1 gigahertz. And but at the same time, they're pressing the FCC to include 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, the broadband radio service, and I think educational broadband service within the screen. And I think what the FCC would like to do is bring some clarity to the spectrum screen in advance of the AWS-3 and the incentive auctions. And so I think a lot of folks are going to be watching that carefully, in coming weeks, since they may go forward with some guidance on what they're going to do on the spectrum screen, perhaps in the May timeframe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just interject. I echo that. That I think that's a huge thing that the FCC is going to I guess, weigh in on, because if you do low band, then it kind of hampers AT&T and Verizon's position as they go into this 600 megahertz auctions. But if you weight that, then it'll hamper them, right? But if you also include the whole portfolio, which Verizon and AT&T, Verizon really, I don't know about AT&T, but I'm sure the same thing, is because of the vast holdings of 2.5 BRS EBS stuff. And Sprint would look like they would be hampered if there were any rules. So I think that's where Sprint's looking for, is to weight the different spectrum bands, of which, if you have more low band, then there's more weight or less weight associated with it. It depends on which way, but it's obviously a positioning right now. It'll be really interesting to see what the FCC rules on the spectrum screen.
Yeah, it does seem like, obviously Sprint is in a bit of a bind here, because they are trying to, on one hand, promote their vast spectrum holdings and how it will power their Sprint Spark plan, by saying, we've got all the spectrum, we can do all this great speed with it. But at the same time, they are trying to, I guess, on the regulatory side, perhaps not be so boastful about the benefits of the 2.5 spectrum. And so, try to, again, if that weighting issue comes into play, that could be perhaps a detriment to them. But again, I think everybody knows or realizes that there is differences in the spectrum, but it's, again, that is so much spectrum that they have. They have probably more 2.5 than the other carriers have in all their spectrum holdings together. So to not include that, or how you include that, I guess, is a challenge. And maybe from Jeff, are you sensing in Washington that weighting aspect? It seems like it is mostly going to be a decision that's going to impact Sprint. It'll impact everybody, but it does seem like that 2.5 seems to be a big part of it. And is there any sense, I guess, at this point, at how that might turn out? What's your view on how that's being handled at the FCC?
It's hard to say. There have been no nuggets about what the FCC is going to do. It's been clear that they've been looking at the weighting issue for a while, and nothing's changed insofar as the entities that control the low band. And it may well be, it could come down to splitting the baby. It could well be that the FCC does weight the below 1 gigahertz spectrum greater than other spectrum. Then the question will be, to what degree do they weight it greater? And it could be as well that they do include the 2.5 BRS EBS spectrum as well. It could be a mix of both. That a decision like that would not surprise me. And an interesting issue, if the FCC does include the 2.5 gigahertz in the spectrum screen, right now the SoftBank Sprint's efforts to acquire T-Mobile, have hit a roadblock here in Washington insofar as competition policy and keeping the national framework at 4 carriers. But one can see that it could become even more complicated to include the 2.5 in the spectrum screen, insofar as their designs on T-Mobile going forward. It would add another layer of complication to that.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, that could be a bit of a challenge for them. I mean, I guess there's always, I know during our webinar we did last week, there were some questions that came in from people, and there's, someone had mentioned that, I guess during the 700 megahertz auction, that was in 2008, that was kind of a big watershed moment. A lot of money was raised, but during that auction, it did seem like Sprint and T-Mobile didn't participate in that auction, and so and for them to now come back and kind of be complaining about carriers having too much below 1 gigahertz spectrum. It did seem like they did have an opportunity to get some, but they chose not to. Maybe from Bill, I mean, do you think that impacts at all their argument about now coming back and saying, hey, we need to kind of keep the sub 1 gigahertz guys from or sub 1 gigahertz band kind of separate from the other spectrum? Do you think that at all impacts their argument in this case?
Yeah, sure. I think that if you probably there's some public statements from AT&T and Verizon that have used those
Yeah, sure.
same arguments. And I think going back, everything is about positioning right now and putting forward the right arguments for each carrier's position. So if you rewind back to auction, I think it was 73, was it?
Yeah,
auction
73.
66 AWS, 73 was 700, and it was probably 2 years within of each other. And T-Mobile was just coming off a vast expenditure for capex to buy that spectrum. So to raise more money, I don't know. I mean, it's really a timeline within corporate where you talk to the German DT franchise and say, "What? You want more spectrum? We just gave you all this money." So that could be in that timeline of discussion as well. And Sprint, I don't know. I think that they were looking at 2.5, and they were also working with their cable partners. Yeah. Back in auction 66, so it's hard to say, unless you actually talk to the spectrum planners. Then
sure, yeah. And obviously, like you said, it was a very rapid. It was 2006 for the AWS auction, 700 megahertz. So you're right, it was 2 years. I think in auction 66 there for the AWS spectrum, T-Mobile spent I think $4 billion there. So yeah, to come back and spend, to go back to Germany and ask for more money again for another auction would be probably a little difficult at that time. And at that time, T-Mobile wasn't as successful as we've seen them over the past year either. So obviously, raising that kind of money that rapidly would be a bit of a challenge.
And if you think also the relative pockets are deeper at AT&T and Verizon than T-Mobile and Sprint. So that could have a factor as well. So if you take a look at AWS and 700, both AT&T and Verizon played in both auctions. They've got deeper pockets.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, I guess with the HBlock, I guess maybe let's touch a bit on the HBlock. I know during the webinar we didn't get much time to talk about the HBlock, which just finished up a couple weeks ago. It was kind of, I guess, the first of the trio of auctions that were kind of going to be planned over the next 18 months or so. Maybe from Jeff, I guess, what's your general view of the success of the HBlock auction? I mean, obviously it was a unique auction in that it was only 10 megahertz of spectrum. It was kind of high up in the 1.9 band. I guess what's the general view in Washington of the success of that auction, and maybe your view of kind of, I guess, how that process kind of went about?
Yeah, Dan, there's kind of there are mixed views on that auction, and if you look at the fact that there hadn't been a major auction, this wasn't a major auction, but there had been a drought auction-wise since 2008. So in that sense, they were able to hold an auction and bring in, what was it, 1.5? They
$1.5 billion
hit the reserve. So on that level, it was a step forward. However, the fact that the picture was muddled by the fact that Sprint decided not to bid, which likely would have brought in more receipts to the U.S. government for that spectrum, and the fact that that Dish's bid involved some regulatory relief insofar as some of the build out and some of the flexible band plan
Yeah.
allowances made by the FCC. There's some thought as well. Commissioner Rosenworcel at the FCC had felt that if HBlock had been combined with another block, they would have been able to raise more money. But again, it was kind of a difficult position because I think the FCC was anxious and the industry was anxious to see more spectrum come in to the market. Now, and there are still others that felt that that HBlock was more of a retail sale in the sense that the price was set and there was just one serious bidder for all practical purposes, and that was Dish. And so there's been some criticism of the handling of the auction on that basis. You're not going to please everybody, but I think going forward, I think the FCC is going to look at the experience, what happened in HBlock, and actually that'll be one of a large number of factors and variables that they'll consider in going forward with the AW and also conducting the auctions themselves as well. And again, all this, there's a lot of moving parts. You've got the spectrum screen, and you've got kind of the global policy view of competition policy. So all this, there are several moving parts, and they have to be, and then the auctions have to be looked at and crafted within kind of a broader context.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I mean, they're definitely complicated procedures that they have to do. I mean, again, like you said, you can't please everybody, but perhaps at the end of the day, when you don't please everybody, that's probably the right decision on what's being made. But yeah, it did seem like HBlock was unique and perhaps should not be a precursor or thought of as a link to what's going to happen going forward. But maybe, I guess, from you, Bill, I guess maybe what was your general thoughts on HBlock? I mean, obviously, it wasn't a huge surprise to a lot of people, but what was your general view on that auction?
HBlock, I think serious bidders should have been two that effectively used it, Sprint and Dish. Sprint obviously has spectrum in the G block that was contiguous to it, and so logic said that if Sprint wanted to have contiguous spectrum, then they're rolling out their LTE on that G block, and if you add another 5 megahertz, then they would have 10 to serve up their LTE would add more capacity and speed. So that's logic, but Sprint threw that logic out, and I think I read where there was some good logic where they weren't going to go after it, and the reason, at least this was reported, was because they didn't have the time to do that, to wait for clearing and actually getting the ecosystem in place. They can afford to wait for it because their LTE future is really in Spark and that 2.5 stuff. Yeah. So it's just an interim measure for that G block, their 5x5 LTE, and that makes all the sense in the world to forego that spectrum because that'll take a couple of years to get it going and to develop that ecosystem. Let's concentrate all our capital to the BRS, the EBS stuff, and deploying 800 and building out a national network. So that makes all the sense in the world to save that money there. And then with Dish, even though they still have it, they are wealthy from a portfolio standpoint. But rubber meets the road when they have to deploy, and if it's going to be national or even some markets, they really have to partner with, because everybody knows it takes a lot of capex to build a network from the ground up, and who's out there logically to help them build out that spectrum. It's really Sprint and T-Mobile right now. I think in public comments, I haven't heard AT&T and Verizon, but we never know because things change, and secondhand aftermarket spectrum deals can come and Dish can sell it all. So.
Yeah, I think that's a topic we'll touch on a bit, secondary market at some point too. But yeah, I guess I mean, does this make Dish a player in the space, or how much of a player are they? I mean, obviously, it sounds like again, it does take a lot of money to get involved. So they haven't really. I mean, they've talked the talk like they want to get involved in this, but Charlie Oregon has definitely not moved too forward with that. I mean, what's your general view now? Is Dish a player now, or are they just going to be a spectrum holder for a while until they do a partnership?
I think personally, maybe Jeff can weigh in also, that because they own so much spectrum, they are a player by default. Okay. It's just a matter of building out the ecosystem and who will help shoulder that building out of the ecosystem for devices, chips, and things like that. And then another one is the band associated with that. That's yet another band that you have to create in 3GPP to support and all that stuff. But it's formidable spectrum. So they are a player by default, and it's just a matter of who will be their partner, who will they partner with to get it up and running eventually. And because everybody's talking about Star for Spectrum, they've got it.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe Jeff, I mean, what's the general view right now of Dish in DC? I mean, are they seen as a viable alternative to the market? I mean, are regulators looking at them as a potential new entrant? Are they maybe a little more concerned that, or conservative thinking that they'll partner with somebody? I mean, what's the general view of Dish right now in DC?
Well, it's unclear. I think the view in Washington of Dish is what it is throughout the country, and I think Bill said it right, that they are a player by default, by the mere fact that they hold the spectrum assets that they do. They're a player. Where it gets complicated for them and for everybody else is how do they monetize that spectrum? Sooner or later, they have to do that.